Good morning or afternoon or evening or whenever you're doing this with your mom and dad. Today we're wrapping up our rotation on Samuel, Israel's last judge. And in today's rotation we're looking at the man that God lifted up and Samuel anointed to be the first king of Israel. Now that guy's name was Saul. And he was kind of reluctant. He really didn't want to be made king first of all. In fact, he went and hid when his name was drawn that he was the person that had been chosen to be king. But he was a big guy, and he was a strong guy. The problem was he trusted more in himself and his abilities than in God and what God would do for him as king. And there are a couple of accounts in Saul's life where he thought he knew better than God. We live in a society that does that a lot. People will tell you, do what you think is right. No, we should do what God thinks is right. We should seek to know God's will and follow it. And that was the problem that Saul had. You see, God gave Saul some commands. And one of the commands was the only people that were supposed to offer sacrifices were priests. But before a battle, Saul was concerned that he hadn't offered a sacrifice to the Lord. And Samuel hadn't arrived to do the sacrifice yet. So Saul took it upon himself to offer sacrifices. And when Samuel got there, he said, "Saul, what did you do?" And he said, "Well, the men were grumbling." Well, want to know something? It doesn't matter if the men are grumbling, because God's command is more important than anything else. And God's command was that Saul was not supposed to offer sacrifices. So that was a negative thing for Saul. But it got even worse. In another time when Saul was attacking this one country that had been harassing and hurting and murdering Israelites, God's command was wipe them out. Kill everybody, kill everything, kill their livestock, kill everything. But Saul kept the best of everything, including the king. He didn't kill him like God had said. And when Samuel showed up, he said, "Why did you do this?" Saul's response was, "Well, I kept all this stuff to bring an offering to the Lord." And after that, Samuel's response was one that should really stay with us with regards to our relationship with God. Samuel's response was, to obey is better than sacrifice. We may think we have a great idea of things that we can or should do to please God, but you see, God has already given us His commands. And we know what we're supposed to do because He's told us. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as ourselves. Now there's other commands dealing with honoring the Sabbath day and not misusing God's name and honoring your father and mother. We still follow those because they show us what God's will is. But when we start to make stuff up because in our minds we think maybe this should be the way we praise God. No, God has told us how we worship Him. God has told us how we honor Him. And at the top of the list is that we obey God. Now because Saul didn't obey God, he lost the kingdom. None of his sons would ever become king. God lifted up another man to be king, and that was David. But David's another rotation. That's about it for this rotation. Next week we will get back on the same page as the Sunday school kids as we begin to look at Jesus's last week among us. We'll start with Palm Sunday and we'll look at some of Jesus's teachings during Holy Week. Until then, I pray that you guys have a fantastic weekend and that this family time and the discussion that follows is beneficial for you and your whole family. Good seeing you. Bye-bye.